Well, hi everyone. I'm Tracy Smith from Chalice Press, and welcome to our Chalice Press Author Conversations. This is the very first of the series of author conversations that I'm doing. I'm Tracy Smith, and I am an employee of Chalice and the new program director of the Family Faith Everyday program. And it is my sheer honor and delight to be talking to you, Cameron Trimble. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, and I get to be the guinea pig, the
Yes.
inaugural interview. So this would be great fun. Thank you for the
So
invite.
please be kind. One of the dangers of starting a series is that you try to start the traditions that you're always going to do. But I think a great way to start these conversations is just to read the bio from the back of the book, because we are authors after all. And so I have two of your books. I know you've written many more, but these are the Chalice titles, Piloting Church and Searching for the Sacred. And I'm going to read the back of your bio and then ask you to fill in the blanks maybe. So it says Reverend Cameron Trimble is the executive director and CEO of Convergence and has years of experience helping start new congregations and revitalize older ones. Having worked with dozens of denominational partners and their congregations, she believes the church's best days are ahead. I do too, by the way. She's also a licensed pilot. So thank you again, Cameron, and welcome. My first question for you is, what would you like to tell us about yourself that is not on the bio in the back of your book?
Well, why don't we start with I am learning how to bake bread, and I have had a couple of good loaves, but I'm mostly really good at baking bricks. Super solid foundational bricks seems to be my specialty. So
Amazing. I also love baking bread. I like to use a method where you put the stuff in the oven, the dough in the oven, pour water in the bottom of a pan, and then it creates steam, and then you shut the oven door like really fast. It's kind of like super dramatic, but
yes. Well, I should also mention so being of an entrepreneurial spirit, and which is code for being nutty as a fruitcake. I kind of accidentally started a farm, and so we're farming about 10 acres in a place called Wadawi, Alabama, that is called the Common Good Farm, which is a community farm that's feeding lots of people in the area. And I should note, I know nothing really about, or I did know nothing about farming. I know a lot about farming now.
how did you accidentally start how does one accidentally start a farm?
So the part of the accidental part was during COVID. We ended up moving to this home we'd owned for a lot of years, and it's in a rural area, and a lot of people here depend on county supplied food boxes. And so there was one day our neighbor brought one to us. Just they had extras, and I realized people don't eat food here. They eat processed. Terrible stuff. And so we had this acreage, and I said, well, let's do something about this. So we're now growing 43 different varieties of heirloom vegetables and flowers, and we're in the regenerative farming movement. And many days when I'm done with, talking to amazing people in the world, I'm in my mud boots and I'm out with chickens and, walking through all kinds of muck that is microbial magic that's happening in these fields that we're.
This is amazing. I mean, we could sounds like another book project.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
A good space to be creative in.
Oh, for sure. Well, I want to steer us a little bit to your current book that's out. I mean, it's not super current. It was published in before everything is like BC, where the C is COVID, and after COVID. This was before COVID. I was diving into this book for the first time in the past couple months, and I was fully expecting to say to myself, like, oh, post COVID, like this doesn't apply. That I don't feel that way at all. I feel like it's you could have put this book out last week and it would be every bit as timely, needed, pertinent. So I have so many directions that I want to go with this book. For anybody that doesn't know about it, I want to just give a brief overview of what I think is really valuable about it. You're a coach among all of the other things that you do. And I do coaching as well. And one of the things that I know is true about coaching is a lot of people don't know what it is, or they think it's somehow inaccessible to them. And I feel like this book is like having a coach
Mm.
uh, in some ways. Like you could buy this book, and for the price of the book, if you really applied yourself to absolutely everything in it, you would get somewhere by the end. So each chapter takes you through this metaphor of flying, but then at the end of each chapter, you give practices for the personal practices for the leader and then also for the congregation. So you could take yourself through, I mean, you could spend a year with this book, I think, if you were going to take each of the practices seriously and go through them. Um, and so the one that I wanted to start with is about money. So you have a chapter on money, and you talk about how everyone has a money story, and then talk about a little bit about asking us to think about what's our money story and then what's our congregation's money story. And so the question that came up to me when I was reading is, what do you think is the, and I know you can't generalize, but what do you think, if you had to generalize, is going on with the money story of congregations that you work with? What trends or patterns do you see?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the reasons that I hope that this book is fairly timeless and that COVID actually didn't render it irrelevant is because that moment was an accelerator of trends we were already seeing.
Yeah.
So it just it revealed to us in a rather dramatic and traumatic and shocking way what was already true about our
Yeah.
systems. And one of the truities of the money stories in a lot of congregations, though not exclusively, but in a lot is they're they're populated by generations of people who remember good old days when the current structure of congregations functioned in a way that that supported their families, that nurtured their children, that there was abundance. And this generation of people who are still in our congregations today are aging, and they are realizing that they don't have that same abundance. So the story has been increasingly over the years one of scarcity.
Mhm.
I am seeing a shift though in that because at this point the majority of our congregations in mainline Christianity are reaching a point of recognizing their mortality
Mhm.
and the members in these congregations, and so they're no longer thinking how do I save my church. They're thinking what of this church could I gift forward to my kids and grandkids.
Mhm.
That's a really important shift because now it's no longer how do I circle the wagons and conserve. It's now, okay, I can loosen my grip on this. What can I just gift forward, because it's not for me anymore.
Yeah.
It's for a world that I won't see. And that that's a brave thing, I think, that a lot of congregations are now contemplating, and it's leading to exciting innovation that we're starting to see at larger scale, which to me is refreshing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you reminded me of something that a mentory friend said to me a while ago about baby boomers. And he said, I think that the next, like the trick that they're going to pull out of the hat is just to give it all away, like to give everything away. And I really, really loved that image. But then I also think about the flip side of it, and something that another mentor of mine said once, and somebody that you and I have in common. And he said to me, when I was kind of starting out my career, like, don't be afraid to make money.
Mm.
Um, and I do see that in the main line in particular. Like, there is this money story that money is somehow that you're more virtuous if you are not dealing with large amounts of money. That if you are dealing with big money, you must be like suspect or I don't know, not doing God's work. Do you see that, or am I imagining things?
I don't know that I've seen that. I mean, I get what you're saying, and I'm not. So I'm going to say a yes and,
Yeah.
because there are some congregations whose entire identity is around the fact that they deal with big money.
Right.
So these are our cathedral congregations, and our, these they're still populated by the executives of corporations, and they're great fun to work with in strategic planning because it's quite intense, very corporate, which is a great deal of the work that I do. Um, uh, uh, I think that I think what we could maybe lean into is the opportunity to recognize money as a leverage, is a tool of leverage in the movement. And probably what holds us back is not our relationship to money, but our willingness to risk and to dream bigger dreams than
Yeah.
we've been dreaming, and then to align with each other. Not We don't have to have perfect alignment in all of our values or perfect alignment in all of our isms to do good work in the world. And
Mhm.
what I worry about for the progressive movement is we tend to cannibalize ourselves,
Yeah.
because we don't, we're not perfectly aligned on every single thing, and so we get defensive and we divide instead of
Mhm.
staying united. And money becomes just an additive into that kind of crazy mix.
I think that's super true. There's this sense of in progressive circles, if you're trying to get, for example, a bunch of progressive authors together on a statement,
Yeah,
everybody will spend so much time like just arguing over this and that rather than saying, this is my observation, rather than saying like, this is good enough. And the danger of not having this out in the world is much greater than not having it exactly perfect how I want it to be. And so we end up just saying like, well, forget it. Like,
yeah.
and I don't know if that's like the fear of being canceled or if it's, I don't know what that culture is about, but I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I talk about it in the book too, that, I mean, one of the leadership principles that I think is important, and I should say, my bias and that was expressed in the book, but it's just true in my approach to this work, is that our leadership in the world is actually a byproduct of our internal
Mhm.
maturity, the internal work that we've done in ourselves,
Yeah.
so that our actions are an outflow of that, and that uh, one of the acts of a leader is that, one, that they're clear. I think we have a real challenge in that, but that we don't let perfect be the killer of good,
Right.
or that we kind of loosen up a bit to allow some flexibility and honoring the needs of all, but moving forward, moving the good work forward.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to a question that I had that's not perfectly formed, but it's this idea of, I think your book has this balance of talking about how to lead the congregation, but then every single chapter has a personal exercise around what are your personal values, what's your vision board, what's your story, what are you doing? And so I'm curious if you think there is, what's the word? It's the word dearth when you have like a big hole in something or like a big lack. I feel like there's kind of a lack of that in leadership discourse. There's a lack of talking about working on your own self and your own personal growth and personal development. Again, is that my own, I don't know, cynicism, or do you think there's also a lack
Well,
of
I
that?
think we live in a culture that rewards adolescent behavior.
Mhm.
Uh,
Uh-oh, did you freeze on me?
are we back?
Yes.
Oh, all right. I
That
don't know.
was actually the perfect dramatic pause because you said what I heard was, "We live in a culture that rewards adolescent behavior."
Yeah. And then you just cycled on my screen. So that's, I mean, the Western mindset right now is one uh, that has not yet matured,
Mm,
and that rewards, really, um, uh, reactive, fear-based, peer influenced, impulsive,
Mhm.
uh, consumerist driven kind of adolescent behavior. Um, so what I think is really important, and I think it's more important than ever before, given the crises that we're facing of, climate change and nuclear proliferation, maybe the potential collapse of democracy. I mean, just some of
Mhm.
these small challenges that we're
Small
facing.
things.
Yeah. I mean, this is unique in human evolution, isn't it? And so the way I've come to think of it is that we use this word transformation so much, but transformation begins with information.
Yeah.
The internal work, the deepening of one's own sense of identity, of value, of integration, of which leads to integrity. All of that internal work, um, at the most base level, it regulates our nervous systems
Mhm.
enough to be functional, wise, capable adults in a context that really needs that kind of wisdom.
Yeah.
And we don't get to look for, superheroes at this point to come and save us from this adolescence that we're in. It's incumbent on all of us to develop that in ourselves.
Mhm.
So it's why I spend a whole lot of time in that book, and then in my other work, um, trying to do what I can to support that maturation in others, and recognize that it's also then feeds my own development
Mhm.
in myself. But I see it as kind of a calling to wisdom teachers right
Mhm.
now. We need more and more of us in the world, that this is the work. It's the information that leads to the transformation that we talk about so much.
I love that. And I think, yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about the value of studying this book with your colleagues in person, like actually around a table. I was talking with a friend about kind of the online spaces where pastors and leaders gather. And I think what ends up happening is you end up distilling things to these sound bites. And I see pastors kind of like going online and asking in this kind of crowd setting, like, what should I do about this like really profound problem? Like the kind of thing that the answer is not something that you could put in two sentences
Yes.
with your peers. Like you need to sit down with me and talk for like half a day about this problem, right? And so I think I don't, maybe I'm like extrapolating too far, but I kind of hear that in what you're saying. Like this wisdom, it takes time, it takes colleagues, it takes coaching, it takes space. I think back to your farming thing, I'm guessing that you do a lot of thinking when you're out in the farm,
Yeah.
right? And like, I think that's missing too with ministers. Like, there's this hustle culture. Like, somehow, if I'm in my office 70 hours a week, I must be a more effective
Mhm.
leader than a pastor that leaves, you know, at 4 p.m. and then goes for a walk with my dog. And I think actually the opposite is true. There's not even a question there. It's just a
Right.
speech.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you a story where I learned that lesson myself. I was um, uh, for most of my life, I've journaled, and um, I when I was working on one of the new church starts, I remember going back and looking in my journal, and I went through a kind of arid, um, almost depressive period where I was quite lost in my own leadership and my own sense of self. And then I looked at the attendance numbers and the participation numbers of the church at that same time. And I
Mhm.
realized that that community, and maybe I should have been worried about it because it had such an impact, but that community was tracking. They were engaged when I was engaged, and they were kind of lost and befuddled when I was lost and befuddled.
Mhm.
That as a leader, my energy into that system was significant enough that I really needed to attend to it. So when we're over functioning in a system,
Yeah.
or when we're, harming ourselves in our um, need to, save the world, and we're not doing that internal work, you can actually literally see the impact of it when you start to study the numbers of your system.
Hmm.
Um, and we would say ideally you wouldn't have a system where it's can be that impacted by a single person's leadership.
Yeah.
But the reality is most of our congregations are, 150 members or less. They're small human communities, and
Mhm.
everyone's energy, has meaningful impact in its life. So to be conscious of that really matters.
I think so. I mean, I think that's part of the tension that I was thinking about as I read your book is like, okay, what is the role of the leader versus the role of the team? And this is where I think the metaphor of the pilot is actually incredibly helpful because the truth is the pilot's flying the plane. Like everybody's going down if
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pilot is not like, if the
Yeah.
pilot has a mental health crisis, which, like, this is a total sidebar, and I don't even care because I'm just following my own nose, but did you read there was an article in the, New York Times a while ago about a pilot. I think it was I don't wanna say which airline it is, like, to slander them,
Yeah.
but he was having, he, like, went to a memorial service and then took magic mushrooms or something.
Yes.
Do you
Yes.
know this story?
Yes. Of course.
Okay. So, yeah, it's like pilot chatter, right? I should
Yeah.
say I'm not a pilot, but I have this weird nerdy interest in aviation, which is one of the reasons I, like, leapt to your book as one of the first ones, and then, like, Holy Spirit synchronicity went up working together on something else. But, like, that story is about so much. I don't know if I can link to it somewhere, put it in the comments. I think it's a fascinating story about so much. Um, in terms of like being afraid to get the help that you need, in terms of, just wacky things that happen. But it's an example of, okay, if you're flying the plane, you have to take care of yourself, right?
Yes.
And the truth is, like, you talk about leading a team, which we all need to do, but the truth is you're the pilot of the plane. And I wonder if kind of collectively we've lost our way in that. We're maybe letting ourselves off the hook as ministers and saying, like, well, I can only do so much. I don't know. What do you think?
Yes, I mean, yes, and I think the context that we're in right now is more complicated and
Yeah.
complex than ever before.
Yeah.
So, I don't know your experience, but when I think back on seminary, which for me was a really great experience, I mean, I
Mhm.
loved, what I can remember because it was a long, long time ago. But there was nothing there that prepared me for this moment in
Yeah.
human history. I feel very, yeah, I mean, I was theologically prepared. I could make that argument, but um, uh, I think that the disorientation of this time is a common experience among us
Mhm.
all. I think one of the gifts that we bring is that um, we know what it's like to wander in the wilderness. I mean, we have a story that tells us how to do that. Kind of the art of being lost, and um,
Mhm.
and trusting that we're not alone in that wandering, and that
Yeah.
mystery actually is revealed along the way.
Mhm.
So I don't. I wonder actually if it isn't just what some of us need, not all, but what some of us need is um, to 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 trust more that this wandering journey that we're on is actually going to lead to good places in the future, and be okay with the lostness of it.
I love that, and that's like a perfect segue to something else I wanted to talk to you about that's in your book. So first of all, it reminds me of Andy Root and Blair Bertrand's book, When Church Stops Working, talking about the remedy of rest and waiting on God's action. I love how you just said the art of being lost. I don't know if that's something that you say a lot, but you should
The
write that down.
title of my
Title
next
something that
book. That's the book I'm working on now.
is it really?
Is yeah.
Oh my gosh! Well, it's a great title. Um,
Yeah.
so in your book you talked about an exercise called 90 days of discernment, and I
Mm.
wonder if you could talk about that as an exercise. What is 90 days of discernment? How do you do it? What are Just talk about it.
Yeah. So the idea behind it is that again, most of the congregations that we're all participating in and or leading, we've inherited the way that they function, and and so we have way too many committee meetings on the whole, and we're kind of over administrating what's actually necessary, and that creates a certain comfort, but it also creates a certain blindness
Mhm.
in our capacity to see what is right before us. So this idea is that for 90 days, you stop all the busyness and you give up the comfort of that rhythm. And for 90 days, you as a community um, uh, discern together. So it's 90 days of prayer. It's 90 days of small group discussions of wondering about what is possible for your congregation, what you're particularly called to as an individual. How you want to live out this calling of being people of the way together. So you're listening for that still small voice, which can't really break through in most of the day-to-day over functioning of congregations that I see
Yeah.
today. So what it allows for, if you can stick to it for the 90 days, and it matters that you go that long, like
Mhm.
30 days is not okay
Yeah.
because you don't get there. But what it does is it slows down that frenetic busyness, and it opens, and you'll actually feel a shift of energy,
Yeah.
which I can only you'll only understand after you experience. But there's literally the system opens,
Mhm.
and there's a reemergence of awe and wonder, that creates a new kind of capacity
Mhm.
in your congregation. So, and that usually happens, days 60, 70, 80.
Yeah.
It takes a little while to deprogram ourselves from the busyness to open ourselves up. So
I
that's
love
kind of
it.
what, yeah, that's kind of the call for that period.
So I have a bunch of follow-up questions about it because I really think this is something there's so many good things in your book. This is one that I just kind of like latched onto. And one of the things I want to say about it, in my own opinion, is that you don't doesn't seem like you have to overcomplicate it. When you talk about this in the book, you gave a few pages of advice and a few questions to follow. But I did want to ask you a follow up of when you say, like, okay, for 90 days, we're going to give up the busyness. What do you mean? You mean committee meetings? You mean
Yes.
programs? What about what's happening in worship during those 90 days?
Well, I'd encourage you to, mess with that too.
Hmm.
Simplify that, because it's not forever. It's just a
Yeah.
little window. But again, it's just, I mean, ultimately what you're trying to do, because it's not magic and
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be complicated. You're just trying to disrupt enough of the rhythms that the blinders fall away,
Hmm.
and that the anxiety about changing, can kind of be lessened so that you can start to dream a little bit. So, every congregation is going to be different, and every congregation, I think, has a range of tolerance for how much they're willing to shift into new patterns versus clinging to old.
Yeah.
So you have to pay attention to your context, but in that 90-day period, my gosh, use it as a playful sandbox,
For
um,
sure.
as far as you all can take it.
I love it. And yeah, when you say that about tolerance, like I'm kind of at the age and stage of life and ministry where I don't have any radar for whether or not this is something everybody says all the time or it's like brand new information. So apologies if this is like super cliche, but I remember a mentor telling me once that like she was like, treat it like the puppy. And I was like, what do you mean the puppy? And she's like, well, when you adopt a puppy, what do they always say? Like if there's a problem, you can always take it back, right? So make that a part of your pitch, right? Like, well, we don't have to keep it. We can always you can always bring it back if it doesn't work. And then
Yeah.
how many times do people sort of say, like, actually, I fell in love with this puppy? And
Yes.
I feel like there are some programs that, especially if you're at a highly programmed church, where if you said, this is only for 90 days, everybody, no panicking, we're just going to take it all away and use the time to discern, if there would not be some things that people would say, you know what, this is great. Like, we love this. We
Yeah,
love not doing this. Or, we're just going to take a year off and then it becomes, yeah, forever, I guess. But I think that that exercise is an example to me of a lot of the exercises in here where you're like, let's do this. Let's give it a
yeah.
try. Right.
Well, yeah, and our motto, or the motto in the book too, is if no one's going to die, give it a try. You know.
Right.
And when I'm being, really snarky, I say to congregations, look, it's not like we can kill the church any faster. I mean, just try something, right? It's not like we can decline a whole lot faster. I mean, we're doing a really good job at this. So, let's.
I do kind of love that energy, right? Like, and this is total sidebar, but whatever. There's this one of my personal gurus and heroes is Tim Ferriss, who's an author of like the very cornily named 4 Hour Work Week, which I think is like yeah, very gimmicky compared to all of the depth that he has to offer. But he has an exercise called a fear setting. And it basically tries to take you through the worst case scenario of whatever action you're trying to think of. And then takes you through steps of like, okay, if that happened, like, what steps could we take to mitigate that? Or what would we do? Right. And that kind of, yeah, stoic outlook of like, well, what's the worst that could happen? What's
Mhm.
the worst thing that could happen if you didn't have a committee meeting or you didn't do whatever for 90 days. So, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Well, I'm going to take another detour just for my own curiosity. You have a chapter on communication in your book, which gets back to the pilot thing, which I'm always excited to talk about. Can
Yes.
you tell us, for those that are not aviation geeks, a little bit about how it works, how communication works when you are a pilot and you are communicating with your co-pilot and then also air traffic control? There's a point to all of this, but you just got to
Yeah.
settle it.
And I don't remember what I wrote, so you're gonna have to.
No, it doesn't matter. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
but so when you're pilot in command in the cockpit, then you hold ultimate responsibility for the safety of the flight. So your co-pilot is a hopefully often, I mean, usually is an equally competent pilot, right?
Competent.
And so what is most important is that there's clarity about who's responsible for what in the flight, because there's a pretty high workload in the cockpit to maintain, a safe flight. So when you're communicating with pilots, so for example, if I'm in command of the plane, if I'm in control and I want to change that, then I would say to my co-pilot, your controls. And the
Mhm.
co-pilot.
Hang on. She's gone. Hopefully she comes back.
Okay, that's weird.
Oh,
Um, I'll
so
just
where we lost you is you said you would say to your co-pilot, my controls, and then
yeah, or you would say, so if I'm if I'm the pilot, I'm going to say your controls. The
Mhm.
co-pilot will say my controls, and then I repeat back your controls.
Yeah.
And what that does is it's a final handoff, a clear handoff of who's actually now got control of the plane. At that point, I can no longer touch the controls. I gave up that right, and
Mhm.
unless I say my controls, and
Yeah.
then he or she would have to repeat that back, right?
Yeah.
Or in the same, when I'm talking with ATC, they will say to me, 823 Mike Charlie, climb and maintain 10,000 feet, and I will need to say back to them, 823 Mike Charlie, climb, maintain 10,000 feet, and so it's received, so that there's a recognition that we're communicating clearly.
Yeah.
Literally.
That's the path I wanted to go down because so I love air traffic control for like random reasons. I still travel a lot, but when back in the day, you used to be able to listen to air traffic control on the plane. I don't know if you remember this, but you could just like with your little cheap earbuds or whatever. And
Yeah.
I would listen to it for hours and not knowing anything about it. And then since I've sort of had friends that are either related to air traffic control or pilots who have like helped me understand what that means and what's going on. The other thing I love about air traffic control, which I think is a metaphor, I don't think we have to like spell out the metaphor, like what it means for leadership. People are smart enough to figure out like how to apply it. Is like when the way air traffic control works is that I'm not explaining to you, explaining to
Yeah.
people watching, is like, the plane, the person, the air traffic controller is only taking you from here to here. And then they tell you to tune into another channel to get your directions for going from here to here. So if I'm an air traffic controller, I'm an expert in getting planes from here to here, but I maybe don't know, I'm not working on getting you landed, or I'm only helping you to get from here to here. And I love that about air traffic control. I think it's such a metaphor. I highly recommend listening to air traffic control as a meditative practice because of that repetition. You can hear people talking, and then you hear the directions and you hear the repetition. I've listened to it for hours and hours. I don't know what the percentage is, but there is a very small percentage of times that there is an error, right? That the person's like, no, that's not what I said. I mean, they don't say it that way. They just repeat the directions. But if you think about it, the stakes are so high that you have to repeat everything. Otherwise, if I tell you to go to some altitude and you repeat it incorrectly, somebody's crashing into somebody, somebody dies. So yeah.
Well, and that's how the discipline of that style of communication happened, is because, in aviation, it is without question that one of the safest industries
Yeah.
that we've ever created. But because we're relentless about the learning from the mistakes that we've
Mhm.
made throughout aviation's history, and then training ourselves to be disciplined in that approach.
Yeah.
You're also helping me remember that we are not at the moment in our consulting practice working with any organization that I could say would report that they are communicating effectively
Mhm.
with their constituency, right? Or
Mhm.
that their constituency would say that they're communicating effectively. So, I mean, one of the most common complaints I get in congregations and denominations is nobody ever tells me what's going on.
Yeah.
People are, and then it goes to people are hiding things. It
Yep.
gets into that conspiracy theory stuff,
Yep.
which is not actually, I think, a reality of we're not communicating.
Yeah.
It's a reality of there's so much busyness and noise that people aren't hearing when we are.
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
as if, on air traffic control, you've got a bunch of pilots and controllers talking over each other. That
Yeah.
seems to be our culture at the moment. And so, it's just a condition of what we're living in right now, that our
Yeah.
communication structures are, it's hard to get through, and it's hard to be clear with our members and our participants.
I think that's true. I also think so. One exercise that I did with my previous congregation when I first came on staff is I just made up like 5 questions. And then I sat down and met with each individual elder and staff person and asked them all the same questions.
Mhm.
And that was really revealing to see patterns, and also it just helped me to kind of like automate the conversations. But in my last call, every single person, leader, staff, random, person, for like, well, what does this church like need to work on? They all said communication.
Yeah.
And it took me years before I realized that what I think they were talking about is what you just said, which is some people have information that I didn't get. That's what they meant by communication. At the time, I was like, oh, well, I'm going to start some e-notes so everybody will get e-notes. And I'm going to like do the website and Twitter and all. And that stuff was good, actually. It did help with the problem because it did have more channels where everybody is getting the same information. But really, what I think people were trying to say was there is some people are getting information that I'm not getting. And I don't know if it's that people are talking over one another, or if I think sometimes there is a culture of like guarding information, or, the meeting after the meeting in the parking lot and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the remedy is, because I think it speaks to a number of things that happen in churches, right?
Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah. All right, let's see, what else do I have on my list? Okay, so you have, I don't know if you remember this, but in your book at the beginning, you talk about a dream team of people
Yeah.
that you would put together to write the book. You were like, these are the people in my dream team. And it's truly like a mixture of people that you knew in real life. And then also just like, I'm putting Gandhi on the dream team or whatever. Who would you have on your dream team now for directing the church? This is totally a wacky question.
Oh, that's a good. Oh gosh. Um, so I'm gonna go with sort of big figures because I don't want to call out individuals.
Right. Yeah. No, I got you.
um, I like Desmond Tutu comes to mind, of the spirit of what how Desmond Tutu brought joy, to the work.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I, I mean, uh, I'm a Christian on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I like to play or practice Buddhism Tuesday, Thursday, and so I'm one of these perennial wisdom kind of
Mhm.
people. I mean, I'm saying this in jest. I'm a Christian all
Yeah.
the time, but I really respect the wisdom of other
Yeah.
traditions. And I think what Buddhism has to offer us. I mean, I'd have a Buddhist on my team,
Mhm.
whether it's Dalai Lama or some other. I just think Buddhism has such
Yeah.
gems that actually deepen our own Christian story,
Yeah.
which I'm only discovering. So I'm new into
Mhm.
that world. Um, so I think that we have really wonderful wisdom bearers.
Yeah.
Maybe I would add Krista. Uh, um, oh gosh, Piccoli Estes. What's her first name?
I don't know who you're talking about.
Clarissa Piccoli Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, and
Oh, nice.
she's one of our great storytellers. I
Mhm.
love the way that she narrates. And I think right now in our, this has probably always been true, but particularly now, we need new stories.
Mhm.
And so if I was, or actually as we are, reimagining a healthy faith tradition,
Yeah.
um, we need our storytellers to give us new stories to build our theologies on.
100%. I'm going to
Uh,
ask you about somebody that you might be like, this is a weird left turn. But since we're just talking about random big people, one person that I didn't know who it was that you mentioned in the book is Martha Beck.
yes.
Can you talk about her? She seems like a very interesting person. And so when I Googled her, like
Yeah.
what came up was who is Oprah's coach? And then I was like, what? Is this like actually Oprah's coach? And then I was like, holy cow, it is. So tell me about this Martha Beck creature.
Yeah, well, I've appreciated her work,
Yeah.
and I appreciate the way she pushes social boundaries at this point. But so she's a Harvard trained psychologist, and actually, uh, I think her PhD is in Sanskrit or
What?
Chinese. Uh, I mean, it's in forgive me, Martha, if I'm getting this wrong for you. But anyway, her mind is a marvel. She's written a number of books, fiction and nonfiction, but I found the way that she can take um, uh, the theory of psychologies
Mm,
and make them very practical in how you and I, as pedestrians, could approach or practice some of these uh, different ways of seeing and different ways of being.
mm.
I find that she's very gifted at that, which is why she's working at the scale that she is, because I'm
Yeah.
not alone in that assessment.
I love
So
it. I mean, it kind of, to me, hinted at this theme that I've sort of seen run through our conversation, which I've also seen run through your book and also just your interests in life, which is that if we're to be well rounded pastors and leaders, we have the gift of being able to draw from all sorts of different disciplines and different fountains of knowledge and wisdom. So I think, yeah, that's a great gift that you bring to me. I relate to that so much. You start out the conversation by talking about being a serial entrepreneur. And I'm curious, what you would have to say to anyone watching about, you kind of made a joke about it and said that means that you're nutty. Like, and I was like, hey, I feel attacked because I also feel like a very entrepreneurial spirit. But what would you say to the gifts of being, what does entrepreneurship have to say to the church and to church leaders right now?
Well, the gift it's granted me personally, that impulse to create,
Mhm.
is that it's built within me a resilience to the pushback that institutions are by design, going to offer in
Yeah.
response to your creativity. Um, so having that, I mean, and and again, if I'm being snarky, I have it sometimes describe myself as a bit non-compliant. I'm
Mm.
like, if everybody's going to go do this thing, I'm not going to go do it. Just,
Right. Same.
well, right. And it's never adversarial. It's a curiosity that has kind of
Mhm.
always driven me to like, well, if everybody else is going to go study that, I'm going to go study this other thing, or I'm going
Yeah.
to go in this other space. Um, and that is truly, I think I was born that way. Like that's
Mhm.
deep in me. Um, uh, you know, of all the industries that exist, and I mean that simply as like sectors of organized society, um, the faith space is one of the few, I think, that has not taken seriously our need for research and development
Mhm.
and funding into that kind of work. So it's the entrepreneurs among us who are at this point in our history, either doing that kind of creative work sacrificially,
Yeah.
um, at great cost to themselves, or they're funded at really low levels at this point. I'm not seeing
Mhm.
any major funding at any meaningful scale
Yeah.
into.
Come back to me, Cameron.
So weird.
It's all right. I just sing to people when you go away. Come back to
Oh, good.
me.
Yeah, it just cycles on my side.
You're,
So anyway, I'm not seeing any investment in entrepreneurial endeavors at any meaningful scale.
you
Um,
mean faith-based entrepreneurial
yeah,
endeavor, right? Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
that's we're kind of winding up, but that reminds me of a question that I wanted to ask when we were talking about money. And I'm not going to take the time to find the exact quote in your book, but um, you talked about funding sources for church, and I'm going to risk looking like a dodo by saying like, is that a thing you were talking about, like angel investing for the church? And I was like, are there big pots of money for faith-based institutions beyond the ones that everybody knows about that I don't know about? Or are
Yeah.
you talking about churches partnering with secular, non-faith-based
Um,
organizations?
well, there is all of the above. Most investing period comes from personal relationships.
Yeah, sure.
So that's the
I
hard
see what
part.
you're saying. I see what you're saying. You're not talking about like some big kind of,
No, there's not like
yeah,
a venture capital
yeah,
fund
yeah.
that
You're talking about, yeah,
community.
private. I
Yeah.
think that, I mean, that I would love to have an entire conversation about all that, but that's like for
Well,
another.
it's an interesting space right now. I mean, we should have a conversation
Yeah.
about it because we're at a very curious turning point, I think, in how
Yeah.
philanthropy is functioning
Yeah.
in this space, and then also what's happening in national denominational systems,
Mhm.
um, and where resources are hoarded, and what that's going to mean for our future, and kind of where resources are opening up to. So
For
it's worth a strategic conversation to look kind of at the 30,000-foot level and
yeah,
see what's happening.
particularly with regard to, property as well,
Yeah.
right? Like, all of the real estate, all of the property, like, I don't wanna be naming names and, like, institutions that I'm connected to, but just, like, in broad general terms, I'm in the Chicagoland area, right? And if you think of some of the property values of some of our small churches, I mean, they're, like, sitting on millions and millions of dollars of property that's locked up. And I had a conversation with like a brief chat with Brian McLaren about this, and I was kind of like, oh, they should sell it, and like, and he was like, maybe not so fast.
Yeah.
So like that's, I think that there's a lot that is part of how the church is changing so rapidly. Maybe like post COVID, like it's just kind of collapsing. I think that's also true of our denominations too, that they're collapsing way quicker than they were like a bit ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're winding it up. And of course, Cameron, I got to end with my commercials. And we got to end with commercials of where people can find you. So, where do people find you if they're like, oh my gosh, this is a magic person. I need to know more about her and her work. Where do people connect with you?
Well, there are a few places. So you can go to convergenceus.org, and that's the organization that I'm the CEO of that does work with congregations and individuals. And then you can go to CameronTrimble.com if you want to just geek out with me
Yeah.
individually. Yeah. And I have to tell you, I'm not on the socials much anymore because I just find it all so exhausting and
Yeah.
morally complicated. But you can find me there. You're just not going to find a lot from me there.
Yeah, but people could stalk you. People could definitely stalk you on the LinkedIn, as
Yes,
I have
no,
done.
that's true. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and then I've also got a Substack. That's called Piloting Faith. So you can.
Oh, well, that is a gem that I didn't know about. So yes, that's amazing. So thank you for this. This is a super generous conversation. I do want to again point people to Piloting Church. We talked about it a lot. We didn't get to your other Chalice book, Searching for the Sacred. The only thing I want to say about this one, commercial wise, and honestly, it's a public service to everybody watching, is that this one is Meditations on Faith. The thing I love, there's two things I absolutely loved about it. Beyond the great content of the meditations, but each one has reflection questions and space to write. So you can, back 40 minutes ago, we were talking about investing in your own soul and spirit as a leader. And this is just a simple way to do that. To every single one of the questions. Honestly, I mean, I love the meditations, but you could also just use this book and just do the questions, work your way through the questions. They're really compelling. And then also at the end, you give this group discussion guide that I thought was worth the price of the book, because as a minister, all of us are like, oh no, I'm supposed to lead a thing. Like, and it's supposed to be well thought out, and it's supposed to be 20 minutes long. And you can just like grab the book, flip to that thing, pick one of the meditations, and then you sound like beautiful and coherent, and Cameron did your work for you. So those are my commercials on behalf of Chalice Press. Cameron, thank you so much. This has been fun and delightful, and I hope to talk to you for multiple hours in the future as well.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.